So, any idea why they might have a bald head? Well, they eat on dead things.
Oh, okay.
They're sticking their head into
Yeah, it might
carcasses,
get bad. Yeah.
which might have lots of worms and maggots and all crawling around on it. And then when they pull it out, their head would be covered in this stuff. Feathers are extremely difficult to keep clean, and if you don't have clean feathers, you're not going to be as healthy. It would be like if you went without bathing for a year. You're going to have skin rashes and other health problems. So it's believed that over the millennia, the birds that didn't have feathers on their head, they were more successful, they lived longer, they produced more young, and therefore their genes were passed on over the generations. Let's see, what other things about the turkey vulture? When you see them flying around in the air, another thing to look for beyond this dihedral wing shape is they tend to be a bit more unstable. Rather than solidly flying through the air, they tend to wobble a lot more.
Or is it because the way they fly?
Some think that they might be trying to take advantage of every little updraft in order to stay aloft. And so, because of that, they might not be as stable. Another interesting, a few other bits of trivia. They have some of the best, they don't have that great of eyesight, but they do have a great sense of smell. Their olfactory nodes are huge and much more adept at picking up scents than other animals. And so they primarily use their sense of smell to detect their food, since their food's going to be rotting and stinky and such.
So that's why the big nose there?
Yeah, so they do have very large nostrils. And another bit of trivia that some people find fascinating is, in order to thermoregulate, rather than panting like a dog or sweating like us humans, they urinate on their legs. And then through the evaporative cooling, like if you jump into a pool on a hot day and then you come out, you're going to feel cooler for a longer period of time. Well, the moisture evaporating off their legs keeps them cool, but it does leave behind a white residue, uric acid. And so oftentimes their legs will appear white or gray, whereas the skin below is actually pink. Any questions about turkey vultures? So you can see them pretty much wherever you go here at Point Reyes. It's rare not to look up and after a few minutes not see any soaring around. So let's move on to the butios. The butios are what we Americans tend to recognize as hawks, although back in the old world they aren't quite as common. And back in England, say, they were called buzzards. But over here in the New World, when you hear the term buzzard, what sort of animal do you think of?
The land animal, like a rooster?
Nah, not, trying to think of what word you're thinking of. But usually people here in the US refer to the vultures as buzzards, but over in the old world, the butios are referred to as buzzards. And that's probably one more case of how when early European explorers and pioneers arrived over here, they saw new animals and they didn't really know what to call them, and they'd heard about some wild animal in some place they hadn't been, like Africa or such, and they called the bison over here buffalo. They called what we call elk, whereas back in Europe, you say elk, they are referring to moose, or what we call moose over here, etc. And similarly, buzzards, that name got misapplied. But the butios tend to like open grassland areas with sparsely spaced trees. They tend to feed primarily on rodents or rabbits and such, but sometimes we'll also go after snakes and lizards and other small animals. And the most common of the buteos here in North America would be the red-tailed hawk. Pretty much wherever you go, you can find red-tailed hawks. And at this time of year, it is the migration season, and lots of red-tailed hawks are flying through the area along with other birds of prey. And if you go down to Hawk Hill in the Marin Headlands of Golden Gate National Recreation Area, on some days you'll see hundreds of birds of prey soaring overhead as they're trying to figure out how to get across that body of water called the Golden Gate. But here, excuse me, over the next couple months, if you drive out towards the headlands, you can often see red-tailed hawks perched on every other pole, a telephone pole out there.
Oh, here?
Yeah, out here at Point Reyes. Lots of red-tailed hawks come out this way. And so, a lot of people will see red-tailed hawks, but they don't always recognize that they are red-tailed hawks because they don't always have red tails. Here's a red-tailed hawk, but do you see a red tail on it?
No.
No.
This is a juvenile. It isn't until about when they turn 2 that they molt their juvenile feathers, and red feathers take the place of these barred tails. So if you see a hawk and it looks to have a large white breast and then brown band of feathers around its belly, it's probably a red-tailed hawk. Another thing is the leading edge of these wings. It's called a patagial patch, but this area tends to be dark, whereas the rest of the wing will look relatively
There's something
light
up
colored.
there.
And can you identify what that is?
That doesn't look like this. Because, oh, it has
It's-
a osprey?
No, that was a turkey vulture.
Oh, turkey bunch.
Yeah, maybe we'll get another glimpse of one. So another buteo we have in this area that nests in this area, and pretty much every day we hear them calling in this area in the morning and in the evening, is the red-shouldered hawk. And sometimes they'll perch over here on these phone lines. They like these edge habitats where they can roost in these trees, but then they'll feed out over here in these grasslands and meadows and wetland areas. And they get their name because of the red patch on their shoulder. And so they're going to be going after ground squirrels and rodents and such. Let's see. Our resident red shoulder is in here for the day. There are also more irregularly ferruginous hawks. These are winter visitors, so not too likely to see them during the summer or fall, but during the winter we often see
Do they
them
migrate
out.
from somewhere?
Yeah, they migrate from further inland, the upper northern Rocky Mountains to a large extent. And they're one of the more handsome, beautiful. So that's the California towhee. And then there are 4 other buteos that sometimes and highly irregularly show up here. The broad-winged hawk is usually an eastern species, just found east of the Rocky Mountains, but they do summer up in Alberta. And every now and then, as the migration season begins, a storm comes through and blows a few of these broad-winged hawks off course, and instead of going down one of those eastern flyways, they wind up out here on the western Pacific flyway and So every now and then at this time of year, we'll start to see a few broad-winged hawks. The zone-tailed hawk tends to be more Mexican and Central American, but if you go down to Big Bend, you can find those in relatively large numbers. But every now and then, storms blow them off course and they come up here. And an interesting behavior about these zone-tailed hawks is they like to hang out with turkey vultures. And what does it look like?
Yeah.
V-shaped wings, black, it looks like a turkey vulture.
Right.
And so it's using those turkey vultures as camouflage. Because if you're a rabbit nibbling down here on the ground and you see some shadows pass over you, you look up and you see V-shaped wings and dark, what are you going to think?
It's a
It's a
vulture.
turkey.
And so what are you going to do? Are you going to dash for your burrow?
No.
No, it's, turkey vultures aren't going to attack you. But then out of that kettle of turkey vultures, a zone-tailed hawk might drop on you. All right, rough-legged hawks, rarely seen here, but a few have been. They are more of an Arctic, northern Canada species, and then during the winter is when we most likely see them if it gets really cold up north. The Swainson's hawk, they like to nest out in the Central Valley during the summer, but then in the fall they head south and they fly down to Argentina. And then they come back north for our summer to nest. And Swainson's hawks, as well as rough-legged hawks and other birds that are flying from one country to another, this is an illustration of just how important it is to have relatively uniform environmental laws to try and protect birds across the countries. Because with many of these birds of prey, do you know what caused them to significantly have population declines back in the 1950s and 60s?
The use of DDT and
Yeah.
pesticides for farming.
Right. So the DDT,
So their eggs became weaker and they kind of could not hatch.
yeah. So when the mothers would sit
Yeah,
on
they
the
will-
eggs to incubate them,
Yeah.
the eggs would break or they would pop out of the mother without any shell. And if the egg doesn't have a shell, it's not going to be viable. So DDT was widely spread in the 50s, 60s, and caused birds of prey populations to plummet. But then in the early 1970s, here in the U.S., we prohibited the use of DDT, but didn't prohibit the manufacture of DDT. So these chemical companies then shipped the DDT down to
developing
South
countries.
America, for use to combat malaria. But then when these Swainson's hawks flew down to Argentina, they were still getting exposed to DDT. And it's only recently been that here in the U.S., the manufacture of DDT was prohibited. But given how multinational corporations are now, well, these companies are still manufacturing DDT abroad and still spraying it in many of those nations. So, let's see. So those are the butios. Accipiters. If you mention hawk to Europeans, they're generally going to think of accipiters. And here in the U.S., we have 3 species, all of which have been seen here. The sharp-shinned hawks tend to be relatively small, and a few more things about accipiters. They tend to like to live in woodlands, and with the long tails, short wings, they're very agile, flying through the trees. The short wingspans keep them from clipping their wings against the branches and all, and the long tail serves as an effective rudder for making sharp turns. So the sharp-shinned hawks tend to go after warblers and sparrows and other small songbirds. That's another feature about the accipiters, is that they are birders, or they like to feed on birds more than rodents and other mammals. And they can be very aggressive. I've seen Cooper's hawks, which are a bit larger than quail's about crow size. I've seen some land on top of the bushes and try to burrow down into the bushes. And once they get below the canopy of the bush, out from the side, dozens of quail might dart. So the Cooper's hawk tends to go after quail and other large birds. And the Cooper's hawks and sharp-shinned hawks can look very similar when they are an adult, as well as when they're juveniles. And about the only way to really tell them apart, since the male Cooper's hawks are about the same size as female sharp-shinned hawks, is to look at the tails. The sharp-shinned hawks' tails tend to be a bit more square-shaped, sharper corners, whereas the Cooper's hawks' tails tend to be more rounded, like Cooper's tires, if that helps you remember them apart. And we also have seen just a few times northern goshawks. You generally need to go up into the Sierra or further north or up into the Rocky Mountains to find these northern goshawks. But back in England, they were amongst the favorite birds by the noblemen who would be participating in falconry. And their scientific name somewhat reflects that. Gentilis is synonymous with noble. And this particular image I chose to illustrate a common behavior a lot of birds exhibit after capturing food. It's called mantling. And underneath there's a bird or rabbit that it's caught. And what it's trying to do is to hide its prey from any other birds of prey that might be flying around. And also by spreading its wing, it's making it look big and tough. Somewhat like if you're going up to confront a bully, you're going to puff up your chest and try and lower your voice and make yourself seem as intimidating as possible. And the way the birds of prey do that is just by fluffing up their feathers, spreading their wings, and maybe also making deeper noises from their throats. All right, since we're not really seeing anything from here, let's continue on. And maybe start moving to the more falcon-like birds. We do have some kites here. Well, just one kite, one species of kite, the white-tailed kite. And for a while, there was a bit of confusion over whether the kites we had out here were the same or different from those back east. Those back east were called white-tailed kites. Those out here were called black-shouldered kites. But during the past couple of decades, ornithologists decided they're the same species. And so the white-tailed kite name is common now. But it is a very beautiful bird. And rather unique behavior they exhibit is they will hover out over these fields where they will rapidly flap their wings, but they're not moving anywhere. They're just hovering in the air as they're scanning the ground for any food. That behavior is also performed by American kestrels, which are the smallest of the birds of prey we have here, but amongst the most colorful. Oh, I forgot northern harriers. So, American kestrels, this would be a male. The females tend to be a bit duller in color, as is the case with many birds. Males tend to be more vibrantly colored, have showier feathers like with peacocks and such, or sage grouse from the Great Plains will have those big billowing air sacs. With the American kestrel, the males tend to be a lot more colorful, and they'll also perform that hovering behavior over the grasslands as they're searching for mice and other small rodents, or even large grasshoppers and caterpillars. And we're gonna take a bit of a break from birds of prey right now because we're at the fence, which a lot of people are curious about. So back on 1906, or April 18th, 1906, Point Reyes shifted about 16 to 20 feet north relative to the rest of the continent. And these blue posts delineate where this rupture was, running down through that red barn, which at the time was painted white. And here you can see the approximate distance that the earth shifted by these fences. At 5:12 a.m. on the morning of April 18th, 1906, the fence line would have come down across where this path now is, right about where I'm standing. And then a minute later, 5:12 a.m., the fence over here on this west side of the fault would have been about 16 feet to the north.
So it just moved.
We've had to reconstruct the fence many times because in this climate, unless you have treated wood, the wood decomposes in a decade or so. Any questions about this before we move on and get back to the birds?
This is the Andreas Fault.
Yeah, this is the San Andreas Fault zone here.
The whole Point Reyes moved ahead?
Not just the whole Point Reyes, but everything on the west side, the Pacific Plate in this area, shifted variously from a few feet on up to about 30 feet in some places.
Was it larger here because it's on the fault?
What do you mean by
You mean
larger?
like the distance, that 16 feet, was it greater here than
Well-
it would be further away, you think? Or?
So if you were, say, out here, you would have felt tremors, but you wouldn't have seen anything displaced immediately in the area. So along here, we saw about 16 feet of displacement. Up here at Bodega Bay, there was about 31 feet of
Oh, so
displacement.
it was just within this actual fault zone.
Right, where you would see, oh,
Yeah.
the fence is down there, the tree is down there now,
that makes
etc.
sense. That makes sense.
Let's see. So, what's your head?
Yeah.
So the white-tailed kite likes to hang out over marshlands, wetlands. So if you head up into the Jacquemini wetlands, you generally see lots of white-tailed kites out there. The American kestrel likes grasslands. So as you're driving out towards the Point Reyes headlands, Drake's Beach, Chimney Rock area, you'll see a fair number of American kestrels perched on fence posts and on power lines and such. We also have merlins, generally just during the winter though, not generally too much at other times of years. They prefer to be further north at this time of year, but they're going to be migrating this way pretty soon. They're a lot more drab compared to the American kestrel, but a bit bigger, whereas the American kestrel is only about that big. Merlins could be about that big. Every now and then prairie falcons are seen, but head for the Central Valley or Pinnacles National Park is a good place to see prairie falcons where they nest, and they go flying out over outside of the park in order to feed on ground squirrels that are ubiquitous across the ranch lands in the area, but the ranchers generally don't like the ground squirrels and they try to poison the ground squirrels, and that has an impact on the prairie falcons, obviously, because they'll ingest some poison ground squirrels every now and then. And here at Point Reyes, if you head out towards Chimney Rock or the lighthouse area, you're likely to see the peregrine falcon. And what's the peregrine falcon's claim to fame?
That they nest in the rocks.
Yeah, they nest out in the cliff sides out there.
Yeah.
But most people who've heard about peregrine falcons know that they are
for
the fastest.
Yeah, recreation also they use, right? To
Sorry?
catch prey and all this thing. They're one of the fastest.
Yeah, they're considered one of the fastest birds, and definitely, if they're diving, they are faster than any other bird that's been recorded. And they can actually exceed this rate of free fall. So if you were to drop a rock off of a cliff top and a peregrine falcon were to race that rock to the ground, the peregrine falcon would win. But there's thought I might have heard a red-shouldered hawk. But if there's a bit of debate over whether the peregrine falcon can outfly some swifts if they're flying horizontally. And as they dive, rather than trying to snatch their food out of the air, they tend to ball up their talons, their toes, into a fist and just hit the bird in flight with their balled up toes, and that'll more or less knock that bird silly, and after a bit the peregrine falcon will be able to recover from the impact and then snatch the bird while it's still falling in the air. The peregrine falcon used to be called duck hawk because it likes to feed on ducks and other waterfowl. It likes to nest along cliffs which are close to lakes and marshlands, or out here at the headlands, the ocean, where they can find a lot of common murres and other birds on which to feed. And the peregrine falcon was one of those species that was listed on the Endangered Species Act list, but has since been delisted because it was classified as recovered. And a number of other birds, like the bald eagle, have seen similar success thanks to the Endangered Species Act. Unfortunately, the Endangered Species Act has come under a lot of attack during the past few years. Last year, 63 bills were introduced in the Congress to either prohibit certain species from being listed or even to just more or less revoke all protection of Endangered Species Act for the animals on the list. And this year I heard that there's close to 100 bills that have been introduced to...
Why? Because they want hunting?
Well, not necessarily hunting. It's more pressure from real estate developers and fossil fuel industry. Because a number of organizations have been using the Endangered Species Act to try and contain real estate development or commercial development.
In certain areas,
Yeah, in certain areas where a lot of animals that are listed as endangered live, because